you think about pre-emerge corn herbicides, we got a couple of things here. First of all, product selection. Which product is going to work best for you? And then the next thing is going to be, how do I make whatever product I choose work to the fullest extent in my field?
All right, well, I want to take the second question there. How are we going to make that work? The first suggestion I have for you is lightly incorporate it. If we can get the pre-emerge herbicide down into the ground, it's going to require less moisture for activation because now the herbicide is where we want it to be. However, I will just say we've got to keep it shallow. Most of the grass killers and broadleaf killers for that matter in corn are shoot inhibitors. They're going to go into the shoot. The shoot is above the seed. Okay, so think about that. Where are the seeds germinating? An inch deep, half inch deep? You got to keep that pre-emerge herbicide relatively shallow. But if you can do that right, it'll require less moisture. You'll see more consistent control.
Okay, the other thing is getting good spray coverage. We hear a lot of times about, well, I could impregnate on dry fertilizer. Well, dry pellets don't exactly spread perfectly even across the field. I'd much rather spray out that herbicide and try to get all the soil particles coated as best I can.
All right, I want to jump back again to the timing. I already said incorporate, that'd be great. Well, that means you're going to be just before planting. A lot of people will spray it after planting. I don't really love that because now you've got to get pretty quick rainfall. Otherwise, that herbicide isn't going to get activated. All right, if you're in a drier area of the country like we are and you say, I don't want to incorporate my herbicide, that's fine. We would just like to have you put it on 2-3 weeks before you plant, if you possibly could. Okay, so that's where we've got the best chance for rain prior to those weeds coming up.
Now, of course, the downside of putting that product out before planting is when you're opening up that seed trench, you're going to kick some of that soil out of the way, and in that soil is your herbicide. So you may have poor control right in the row. And we see a little bit of this in spots every year from guys that do it this way. But you know what? Look at the post-emerge options that we've got to clean up a few extra weeds, especially with that first pass. Is generally not that difficult.
Hey, one other thing I want to throw out here is we typically see the most weeds in a field around the field borders and around the waterways. So very commonly, we're bumping it up to the absolute maximum labeled rate in those areas, and we might be reducing the rate a little bit in the areas that are pretty clean. Just something we've done over the years to save a little bit of money, but also to get better control where we actually need it.
Okay, let me get back to that spray coverage part of this because there are different nozzles out there that you can use. You've got a lot of choices on the market, and it comes down to what are you doing with that pre-emerge application? Are you putting 30 gallons of fertilizer out at that time? Or are you just using 10 gallons of water as a carrier? You're gonna have to size your nozzle accordingly. I really like these new 3D nozzles that Hypro has come out with. They give you really nice coverage even when you've got a little unevenness out in the field. Now, again, if you're in that no-till situation like Brian was saying, get it done a little bit earlier so you have more time to get moisture out there to wash it off stalks and get it down into the soil.
Okay, let's talk about products now. The number one thing that I'll say here is it depends on what type of corn you're planting. For example, if you're planting non-Roundup corn and you say, hey, my only grass rescue option is Accent, I'm going to tell you make absolutely sure you're using a full rate of a true grass killer. I mean Harness, Surpass, Outlook, Dual, Zidua, one of those. Okay, if you say, I'm planting Roundup corn and I'm worried about Roundup resistant broadleaf weeds, well, now that discussion's a little different. I've got a built-in super cheap rescue option for grass called Roundup, where even a half rate would wipe out pretty much all your grass. So that's easy. So now I'm much more concerned about the broadleaves, and I might want to go with a reduced rate of a grass killer and have a broadleaf killer in there. So the products like, for example, Verdict, Triple Flex, Sure Start, Corvus, all those, it's cut rate grass along with a broadleaf killer.
Well, I don't want to sell the what you call straight grass products. I don't want to sell them short. They still have some broadleaf activity too. When you think about a Harness or a Surpass, for example, I remember when they came out, it was a noticeable step up from what we had from Dual. We were getting more broadleaf control. Not that it was perfect or anything, but the best broadleaves, or the weeds that it's most effective on in terms of broadleaf weeds, are these small-seeded broadleaves because they're germinating in that top half inch of soil where we've got a strong concentration of product.
Okay, now let's get very specific with products. I would just tell you the advantage to Zidua, the new Zidua that's out there, and it's found in a few premixes as well. That is, it can hang on in the soil when you have a lot more rainfall. So we're finding that to be more popular in the eastern Corn Belt. Harness, Surpass, and even Outlook to some degree, they're much more active with less rainfall. So they aren't going to hang around as long when you have tremendous amounts of rainfall. But this just tells you, hey, where do those fit? Probably the Western Corn Belt. So for us on our farm in the Western Corn Belt, if I said I want to raise conventional corn, so no Roundup, I'm going to go Harness or Surpass most likely. Outlook's not a bad choice either. Now the one product I haven't mentioned yet is Dual. There are a lot of generic products out there, generic lookalikes to Dual. Okay, that's where, hey, maybe if I say that's really, really cheap, yeah, it's not as good on the broadleaf weeds, I'm going to say, you know what, I'll use a full rate of that, and then I'll come along with a great broadleaf killer, something like Status Post Emerge.
If you're after more broadleaf control out of your pre-emerge herbicide, the most popular ones would be Verdict, especially in no-till, because you've got that burn down component with the Sharpen. Triple Flex and Sure Start, we see a lot of that getting used.
A lot of that's because it's really inexpensive, so that's a great starter for guys trying to save money that don't have any weeds.
And then when you talk about the HPPDs coming into the market, we've got products like Resicor and Acuron Flexi that have been really popular, but there are so many different combination products.
Yep, but let's just stop right there. I really like the Resicor because it's got Stinger in there, so it's a little bit better in areas where we have ragweed. It also has some mesotrione, or the active ingredient in Callisto, so I do like that. But the other thing, Darren mentioned Acuron Flexi. Really like that one because it's got Dual, but then 2 different HPPDs in there. So I mean, you can go a number of different ways here, but the point is you've got a lot of selection. Just work with your local dealer and find out, okay, here are my weed problems. All right, here's kind of what fits my spectrum. Don't just look at, all right, I want to stay all with one company or something like that. Look at who has the best stuff for your weeds and your situation.
So there are a lot of choices with corn pre-emerge herbicides. If you want a straight grass product, if you want to focus more on broadleaf control, you have to work on those things to pick the right product for your farm. And then getting it out there, we really like light incorporation if possible. Otherwise, it can be, many of these pre's can be used just laid on top of the soil. You're really going to rely on rainfall to get them down in the soil to get them working though.
Well, the good news here is almost all those pre-emerge herbicides we talked about today will control our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you some other things that will stop it coming up later in the show.